Step out of the car. Now, you don't get special treatment because you're driving a six-figure coupe.
You're making a serious mistake. Call your supervisor.
I am the supervisor out here. Hands where I can see them.
You're about to obstruct a federal investigation, and it's all on camera.
At exactly 9:47 p.m., the parking lot of Vela Row looked like a brochure. Glass storefronts glowing, clean concrete reflecting the neon of designer signs, and the soft choreography of valets moving like they owned the night. A black luxury coupe rolled slowly past the front entrance, not racing, not blasting music, not drawing attention, just gliding toward a corner space under a light pole. It should have been nothing. It should have been a 2-minute stop, a quick, "Sir, we've had thefts here," and a "No problem, officer," and everyone goes home. Instead, it became a confrontation that would later be replayed by strangers on the internet with captions like "Power Trip" and "Watch this cop panic," racking up millions of views and igniting the kind of argument that splits comment sections down the middle. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because this story gets worse, then it gets surgical, and you don't want to miss the moment the entire narrative flips. His name was Marcus Carter, and he was not your average 30-something. Most people his age were trying to impress a boss, impress a date, or impress a camera. Marcus was trying to avoid all three. He dressed plain on purpose, spoke softly on purpose, and moved through the world with the calm of someone who'd learned, the hard way, that calm can be armor. He held federal credentials, had worked multi-agency operations, and carried the kind of quiet competence that doesn't announce itself until it's needed. The important thing about Marcus wasn't that he thought he was above the law. He didn't. The important thing was that he knew the law well enough to recognize when someone else was stepping over it, not by accident, but by habit. Earlier that evening, Marcus had been tasked with a simple, mundane step in a larger investigation: meet a confidential source at a public location, verify a detail, and move on. Vela Row was chosen for one reason: crowds. Crowds are protection, cameras are protection, bright lights are protection. He arrived early, parked where anyone could park, and sat with his hands visible on the steering wheel while he scanned the area like someone waiting for a friend. He wasn't blocking lanes, he wasn't revving the engine, he wasn't trespassing behind gates, he wasn't doing anything that screamed crime. He was simply existing in a luxury space in a luxury car, which, as the footage would later demonstrate, was apparently enough. Then the trigger event happened. A patrol SUV rolled in, slow and deliberate, like it was hunting for a reason. The headlights washed over Marcus's windshield, held there, then slid away as the SUV circled back like a shark changing its mind. The officer stepped out with the stiffness of someone who believed the uniform gave him ownership of the moment. His name was Officer Darren Rains, a department veteran with about 8 years on the job, a reputation for being proactive, and a body language that said he expected compliance before he even spoke. For him, this was routine. Approach, command, control. He had no idea he'd just walked up on someone trained not to be controlled by tone alone. Rains came in close, one hand near his belt, and spoke like the conversation was already over. "Step out of the car," he said, not as a request, but as a conclusion. Marcus didn't match the energy. He stayed seated, shoulders relaxed, hands visible. "Officer, what's the reason for the stop?" he asked, voice level. That simple sentence, "What's the reason?" was where things started to go wrong for Rains, because it forced him to justify himself, and he wasn't used to that in this kind of setting. Rains's tone sharpened immediately, the way a blade sharpens when it senses resistance. "Reason is I said so," he snapped, then added, "We've had problems here. People like to come here and—" He stopped himself mid-thought, like he realized the sentence could sound bad out loud. Marcus didn't take the bait. He didn't argue feelings. He stayed on facts. "Am I being detained?" he asked. The camera caught the smallest pause, the microsecond where Rains had to decide whether to back off or double down. He doubled down. "Out of the car," Rains repeated louder. "Now. You don't get special treatment because you're in a fancy car." Marcus tilted his head slightly, the way someone does when they hear a claim that isn't connected to the evidence. "I'm not asking for special treatment," he said. "I'm asking for the legal basis." Rains stepped closer, voice escalating to fill the space. "Legal basis is I'm conducting an investigation. You're acting suspicious." Marcus's eyes flicked toward the storefront cameras and back to Rains. "Suspicious isn't a crime," he said, "and I'm still asking, am I being detained, and what specific crime do you suspect me of?" This is the beat where the internet later split. Some viewers would say Marcus should have just complied to avoid trouble. Others would say that just comply is how power trips become policy. Either way, what happened next is the reason this case ended up in court. Rains demanded identification. Marcus asked whether he was legally required to provide it absent a lawful detention. Rains said yes. Marcus said calmly, "If I'm detained, I'll comply. If I'm not, I'd like to leave." Rains responded by reaching for the door handle. The body cam captured Marcus's inhale, not panic, not fear, but the controlled breath of someone recognizing the moment a situation turns from questionable to unlawful. "Officer," Marcus said, still seated, "do not open my door. Call your supervisor." Rains's reply was pure ego. "I am the supervisor out here," he said. "Step out." Marcus answered with the first real warning of the night. "You're making a serious mistake." Rains laughed, actually laughed, like the idea of consequences offended him. "Consequences," he said. "For who?" Rains opened the door. He tried to turn the interaction physical, to convert uncertainty into control. Marcus did not swing. He did not resist in the way Rains seemed to expect. He did something more dangerous to a certain kind of officer. He narrated the facts for the record. "I am not resisting," Marcus said, loud enough for the mic. "My hands are visible. I am requesting a supervisor. You have not articulated a crime." Rains grabbed Marcus's wrist anyway, yanked him out, and pinned him against the car with unnecessary force. "Stop resisting," Rains barked on autopilot, the magic phrase some people use to justify whatever comes next. Marcus's voice stayed steady. "I am not resisting," he repeated. "You are escalating without cause." Quick question for you watching. If an officer can't explain what you did wrong, should you still have to surrender your freedom on command? Drop your take in the comments, because this exact question becomes Exhibit A. Within minutes, Rains had Marcus in cuffs. The justification shifted every time Marcus asked for clarity. First, suspicious, then loitering, then trespassing, then possible stolen vehicle, each one thrown out like a net, hoping something would catch. Marcus finally said, "Officer, you can verify the plate, you can run the VIN, you can call your supervisor, but you cannot invent reasons as you go." Rains responded by doing what power does when it's cornered. He threatened, "I can take you in for obstruction," he said. Marcus looked straight ahead. "Obstruction requires me to obstruct," he replied. "Asking questions isn't obstruction." This is the moment everything changed. The moment the story stopped being about a parking lot and became about a system. A second unit arrived. A sergeant stepped out. Sergeant Elena Park. Older, calmer, eyes scanning the scene like she could already smell the paperwork. She asked Rains, "What's the PC?" Rains spoke fast, vague, defensive. "He's being uncooperative, refusing to ID, acting suspicious, fancy car, sitting here." Park cut him off with a simple question that landed like a hammer. "Suspicious of what crime?" Rains hesitated. The body cam caught it. And hesitation, in court, is a confession without words. Marcus, still cuffed, turned his head slightly toward Park. "Sergeant," he said, "I need you to listen carefully. I am a federal agent. I have credentials in my wallet. I am requesting you contact my duty supervisor, and I am requesting you review this body cam footage before this goes any further." Rains stiffened. "He's lying," Rains snapped, like he needed it to be a lie. Park didn't assume either way. She asked for Marcus's wallet. Rains objected. Park overruled him. "We're doing this by the book," she said, and the phrase "by the book" sounded, in that moment, like an accusation. Park opened the wallet, saw the credentials, and you could see the O hit her before she spoke. Not fear, calculation, not panic, triage. Because the problem wasn't that Marcus was important. The problem was that Rains had behaved like laws didn't matter. And now there was a badge in the light proving they did. Park walked away to make a call. Rains stayed near Marcus, jaw tight, trying to maintain dominance over a scene that had started slipping. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't taunt. He simply said quietly, "This didn't have to happen." Park returned 5 minutes later with a look that told the whole story. "Take the cuffs off," she ordered. Rains stared like he'd been slapped. "Sarge," he began. "Now," Park repeated, and this time her voice carried authority Rains couldn't fake. The cuffs came off. Marcus rubbed his wrists once, not dramatically, just acknowledging pain. Park apologized in the clipped way departments teach. Careful, professional, minimal. Marcus's response was even more careful. "I want the incident number," he said. "I want the names, and I want confirmation that this footage is being preserved." Park nodded. Rains looked like he was watching his own future close like a door. The immediate encounter ended right there, 23 minutes from first contact to release. 23 minutes that would change Officer Rains's career forever. Now, most people who get manhandled in a parking lot go home angry, vent to friends, maybe post a rant. Marcus didn't rant, he documented. Within 48 hours, he filed a formal complaint that read like a professional brief, timestamps, quotes, policy references, and a clear narrative connecting each decision to its legal consequence. It wasn't just the officer was rude. It was the officer escalated without reasonable suspicion, used force without justification, and made statements inconsistent with the footage. He requested preservation of evidence, audit logs for the body cam upload, upload, dispatch recordings, and the identity of every supervisor who touched the report. It was the kind of complaint that forces an organization to either investigate or admit it doesn't police itself. The department received the complaint on a Monday morning. By Wednesday afternoon, Officer Rains was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. That speed was not normal. These processes usually take weeks just to get rolling. But Marcus's complaint wasn't emotional. It was precise. It boxed them in. Do you think the department did enough by putting him on leave? Or should there be automatic penalties for unlawful detentions caught on camera? Let me know, because what happened next is where the story leaves the parking lot entirely and enters the courtroom. Internal Affairs pulled the footage. The investigator, Lieutenant Hayes, watched it once. Then he watched it again. Then he brought in the department attorney and the training sergeant to watch it with him. Because the issue wasn't one bad sentence. The issue was a pattern of choices. The footage confirmed everything Marcus claimed. Rains did not clearly articulate a specific crime at the start. Rains escalated commands rather than clarify facts. Rains used the phrase, "stop resisting," while the subject's hands were visible. And Rains threatened charges as leverage rather than as a lawful response to conduct. But there was something else too. Something worse than bad judgment. There were moments where Rains's language hinted at bias in the way he framed suspicion itself, as if certain people in certain places were automatically questionable. It wasn't said cleanly enough to quote as a slur. It was said in the way that makes jurors lean back and think, I know what he meant. Then came the lawsuit, because administrative reviews are one thing, but civil court is where decisions get measured against rights. The complaint alleged unlawful detention, unlawful seizure, excessive force, and retaliation, because once Marcus asserted his rights, Rains escalated. And now, months later, we enter the courtroom. The courtroom was colder than people expect. Not temperature, but energy. It wasn't dramatic music. It was paper, time, and consequence. Judge Alston presided with a face that gave nothing away. Marcus sat at counsel table in a suit that looked ordinary until you realized ordinary was his strategy. Officer Rains sat with the city attorney, posture stiff, eyes forward, like he'd practiced looking innocent in the mirror. The jury watched both men with the quiet suspicion juries reserve for anyone wearing confidence like armor. Marcus's attorney stood first. This case is simple, she said. An officer approached a man sitting in a parked car in a public parking lot. The officer could not articulate reasonable suspicion of a crime. When asked for the basis, the officer escalated. He opened the door, seized the man, used force, and threatened arrest, not because of what the man did, but because the man questioned him. That is not policing. That is punishment. The defense responded with the familiar script. Officer safety, high crime area, recent thefts, suspicious behavior. The judge listened, the jury listened, and then the video played. The body cam footage in court hit differently. On the internet, people argue in real time with adrenaline. In court, you hear every breath. You see every hand movement. You watch a man remain calm while an officer's tone rises like a storm searching for lightning. When Marcus asked, "Am I being detained?" the courtroom heard it as a reasonable question. When Rains answered, "Because I said so," the courtroom heard it as contempt. And when Rains said, "Stop resisting," while Marcus's hands stayed visible, the courtroom heard something else. Narrative manipulation. Cross-examination is where certainty goes to die. Marcus's attorney approached Officer Rains with a tone that never raised, never insulted, never performed, because she didn't need to. "Officer," she began, "you said in your report that Mr. Carter was detained for loitering. Can you tell the jury the legal definition of loitering under your municipal code?" Rains blinked. He tried to paraphrase. She stopped him gently. "Not paraphrase, the definition." Rains couldn't. She asked whether loitering is a criminal offense in that lot absent posted restrictions. Rains said he believed so. She introduced photographs, no posted signs, no restricted access, open to the public. The jury saw the gap. She moved to trespassing. "Trespass requires notice," she said. "Did any property owner or authorized agent tell Mr. Carter to leave before you seized him?" Rains hesitated. "No," he admitted. She moved to stolen vehicle suspicion. "Before you opened the door, had you run the plate?" Rains said no. "Before you put hands on him, had you run the VIN?" "No." "Before you cuffed him, had dispatch confirmed any report of a stolen vehicle matching that car?" "No." The jury watched the pattern form. Suspicion first, facts later. Then she went for the pivot that breaks officers on the stand. "You wrote that he refused to identify himself. Officer, are you aware that a person is not required to produce identification absent a lawful detention based on reasonable suspicion of a crime depending on jurisdiction?" The defense objected. The judge allowed limited questioning. The attorney didn't argue theory. She argued sequence. "Is it your testimony that you had reasonable suspicion of a specific crime before you demanded ID?" Rains said yes. "What crime?" She waited, letting silence expand. Rains offered possible casing. She asked, "Casing what?" He said, "The stores." She asked, "Which store?" He couldn't name one. She asked, "What did he do that indicated casing?" Rains said, "He was sitting." She let the words hang. "Sitting," she repeated, and the courtroom for the first time made a sound, soft laughter that died quickly under the judge's look, but not before it landed like a bruise on Rains's credibility. Now came the moment the defense feared, the stop resisting clip. The attorney played the exact timestamp, then froze it. Marcus's hands, visible. Marcus's body, pinned. Rains's voice, "Stop resisting." She asked, "Officer, what resistance is visible here?" Rains said, "Tensing." She asked, "Where?" He pointed vaguely. She replayed. She slowed. She asked again. Rains finally said, "It's a dynamic situation." She nodded like she understood, then hit him with the line that wins juries. Dynamic doesn't mean lawless. The defense tried to rehabilitate him with officer safety. Marcus's attorney didn't mock officer safety. She respected it and then proved it didn't apply here. "Officer," she asked, "did you see a weapon?" "No." "Did you see contraband?" "No." "Did he make threats?" "No." "Did he flee?" "No." "Did he reach under the seat?" "No." "Did he refuse to show his hands?" "No." "So what specific safety threat required you to open the door and seize him?" Rains said, "He was non-compliant." She nodded once. "So the threat was his words," she said, "not his actions." The jury watched Rains realize too late how that sounded. Marcus testified next, and he did something rare. He refused to perform. He didn't cry for sympathy. He didn't posture for revenge. He spoke like a man describing a procedure that had been done to him incorrectly. He explained why he asked for a supervisor, because he felt the interaction was sliding into unlawful territory. He explained why he narrated, "I am not resisting," because he had been trained to protect the record. He explained what the cuffs did to his wrists, what the shove did to his shoulder, and what the experience did to something deeper. Trust. He said, "I came there to do my job. I left there realizing someone else could ruin my night, my body, and my freedom without explaining why." Then he looked at the jury and said the line that stayed with people. The uniform should never be a shortcut around the Constitution. The most brutal witness for the defense was their own training sergeant. Under subpoena, the training sergeant was asked whether Rains's approach aligned with departmental policy. He tried to be careful. He said words like "could have" and "should have" and "in hindsight." Marcus's attorney pinned him to specifics: when to articulate reasonable suspicion, when to escalate, when force is justified. Then she asked, "Is opening a car door and pulling a person out a use of force?" The sergeant said yes. "Is it justified absent reasonable suspicion or probable cause?" He said no, not ordinarily. "Would you discipline an officer for using force without lawful justification?" The sergeant hesitated, then said yes. That hesitation was the sound of a department realizing it couldn't hide behind vague language anymore. Closing arguments were short because the footage did most of the talking. Marcus's attorney told the jury, "This is not a referendum on policing. It is a referendum on one officer's choices. Choices caught on camera. The question isn't whether officers have a hard job. They do. The question is whether hard jobs excuse unlawful seizures. They don't." The defense argued good faith, split-second decision-making, suspicious circumstances. Marcus's attorney answered with a final sentence that juries remember because it's simple. There were no split seconds here. There were 23 minutes to do the right thing. The verdict came back in Marcus's favor. The jury found the detention unlawful and the force unjustified. Damages were awarded enough to be meaningful, not enough to be revenge. And the judge added something that matters more than money: a written finding that the officer's articulation of suspicion was inconsistent with the video evidence. That finding became a weight Rains couldn't shrug off. The department's final outcome came fast after that. The investigation had taken months, but the decision took days once the verdict hit. The official statement was brief, carefully worded, but the consequences were clear. Officer Rains was suspended, then terminated, with the department citing policy violations related to unlawful detention, failure to articulate reasonable suspicion, improper escalation, and conduct unbecoming. A career ended because of a parking lot encounter that could have been nothing. Everything was documented, everything was recorded, everything was undeniable. When the footage was released publicly, it exploded. News outlets clipped the "because I said so" line. Legal commentators broke down the sequence: question, escalation, seizure, justification, shifting in real time. Trainers used it in classes as an example of how not to let ego become probable cause. Some people praised Marcus for remaining calm and holding the line. Others criticized him for not simply stepping out immediately, arguing that any resistance, even verbal, invites danger. But here's what nobody could deny. The video showed who escalated first, and it wasn't the man in the driver's seat. There were systemic implications too, because cases like this don't stay isolated when they go viral. The department announced changes that looked to some like accountability and to others like damage control, mandatory refreshers on detention standards, updated policy language emphasizing articulation of suspicion, additional supervision for proactive patrols in retail zones, and audits of bodycam activation and retention logs. In plain terms, they made their officers take the kind of training Marcus's complaint implicitly demanded. And then came the pattern revelation. After the video hit the internet, other citizens came forward with similar complaints about Rains. Aggressive stops, vague suspicion, escalating tone, stop resisting used like punctuation. Some reports were unproven, some were messy, but the theme was consistent enough to raise the hardest question. If a camera hadn't been rolling this time, would anything have happened at all? Where are they now? Marcus returned to his work, quieter than ever, refusing interviews beyond what was legally necessary, but using the experience to push for better interagency coordination and clearer accountability when local policing collides with federal operations. He didn't become famous on purpose. He became a case study. Officer Rains, as of the last update in this fictional account, was no longer employed as a police officer. Whether he found another job elsewhere wasn't the point. The point was that a uniform stopped being a shield for behavior the court found unlawful. Here's the bigger lesson. This story isn't just about a cop and an agent. It's about how quickly routine can become rights violation when authority treats questions as disrespect. It's about how some people count on the public not knowing the difference between a request and a lawful order. And it's about the fact that knowledge, calm, precise, documented knowledge, can shift a power dynamic that feels unmovable in the moment. Now let's address the criticism some people always bring up. They say Marcus should have just complied. They say he should have stepped out first and argued later. They say the street isn't the place to debate. Here's the thing. Marcus didn't debate to win an argument. He asked questions to establish the record. He kept his hands visible. He requested a supervisor. He did the safest form of resistance there is, verbal clarity. And yes, there is a real risk in asserting rights during a stop. Marcus knew that risk. He calculated it, and he decided that surrendering his rights by default was a bigger danger in the long run. The fact that exercising rights is considered dangerous tells you everything you need to know about the problem. So what should people take away from Marcus Carter's story? First, keep your hands visible and your tone calm. Your calm becomes evidence. Second, ask clear, simple questions like, am I being detained, and what crime do you suspect? Because clarity forces accountability. Third, request a supervisor early when you feel escalation happening without explanation. Fourth, narrate, I am not resisting if physical escalation begins, because footage gets reviewed later by people who weren't there. Fifth, document everything after, time, place, badge numbers, witnesses, and request preservation of video immediately. And sixth, understand that compliance and rights are not mutually exclusive. Your goal is safety first, but safety doesn't require surrendering truth. One person, one encounter, 23 minutes, and a career ended. That's the power of documentation. That's the importance of boundaries. That's what happens when authority meets someone who won't mirror aggression, won't give excuses, and won't let vague suspicion become a substitute for law. Final question for you. If you were in Marcus's situation, would you have handled it the same way? Drop your answer in the comments and subscribe for more real-style stories of accountability, rights, and body cam footage that changes everything. This story matters because it's not just about one parking lot. It's about every person who's been treated like suspicious without cause, every officer tempted to use ego as a shortcut, and every system that only corrects itself when the camera forces it to. Marcus's story shows you can stay calm, demand clarity, and sometimes win. Not every story ends this way. Not every incident results in justice, but this one did, and that matters. That's Marcus Carter's legacy. Not just a verdict, but showing millions of people that the law is real, even when someone acts like it isn't. This is the story of how a federal agent destroyed an arrogant cop in court. And more than that, it's a story about how knowledge becomes the equalizer. Subscribe for more real stories of accountability and justice. Smash that like button if you believe rights apply to everyone. Share this video because everyone needs to see what escalation looks like before it's too late. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? Have you been in something similar? And what's one thing you learned today?